What's up, everybody? Piscean here, bringing you the second best hospital in the galaxy, but not the actual TV show. It is based off the TV show, but this is the Alienated ET and NHID Transitioners Conceptual Medical Episode Logs, a mature, innovative, and vigorously crafted set of conceptual medical episode logs for the adult animated series, the second best hospital in the galaxy, weaving the themes of alien detransition, exogenous hormone serum use, surgical regret, and the intricate psychobiology of identity. So, let's begin this. Content includes anatomical detail, psychological distress, body horror, and existential themes for real adult audiences only, alright? If you're not mature, get the fuck off. Case log 1 is the gel of glib, and we see the species is Plixian, eusocial gestalt-linked insectoid default drone morph. Page 42 Galactic Standard Cycles presenting complaint, regret following 6 cycles of self-administered trans-species androgen gel, irreversible predatory chimerism, and severance from swarm telepathy. Interesting, right? So we have our narrative history. By the age of 36, this ET had lived a life of seamless belonging. Plixian drones exist as semi-autonomous nodes in a pheromonal hive mind. Their individuality a soft whisper beneath the choral hum of the queen's resonance. This ET, however, nursed a secret species dysphoria, a visceral, eroticized fantasy of becoming a Zorblat. The solitary apex predator is swarm feared. Zorblats are muscular, clawed, aggressively solitary. Their meta-steroidal roar freezes the soul. This ET acquired glib gel on the black market. Oops, did not mean to do it like that. A viscous amber serum extracted from the subdermal glands of running male Zorblat, suspended in a carrier that permeates chitin, applied daily to the ventral joint seams. It induces heterochronic metamorphosis toward Zorblat morphology. The changes were swift and intoxicating. Within 8 lunar cycles, this ET's stridulatory apparatus deepened. The communicative chirps of Plixian society became physically impossible. His forelimbs elongated into scything raptorial appendages. A carotonius horn erupted from his frontal plate, a magnificent runous spire. His pheromone receptors calcified and fell away, leaving only the tyrannical scent of Zorblat musk. He could no longer hear the queen. Silence replaced belonging. The regret was subacute. At cycle 3, the euphoria curdled when he realized a Zorblat pack his intended new kin perceived him not as brother, but as a malformed competitor. They attempted to consume him. His Zorblat rage state, once a longed for power, now erupted unbidden, destroying the solitude he had sought. By cycle 6, this ET presented to the second best hospital, a half-thing with a predator's body and a drone's yearning for chorus. Medical findings and management. This ET's chitin now heterogeneously layers Plixian sheen over Zorblat thick plating. The horn and raptorial arms are fully ossified. Their surgical removal is deemed contraindicated due to integration with the primary neuroganglion. Pheromone receptor autographs are harvested from a willing swarm donor and transplanted into his remaining receptive nodes, restoring only a faint, static Latin hum of the collective. Voice therapy attempts to reshape his stridulation to approximate a low-tier comfort call, though full reintegration is impossible. Outcome and clinical commentary. The CT adopts the name Thracic, meaning scarred between worlds. He enters the solitary drone support group, a circle of Plixian severed from the mind by accident or aberrant desire. Dr. Clax remarks, the gel's transdermal steady-state delivery produced a smoother metamorphosis than injections, but equally permanent results. The tragedy is not the horn, it's silence, and the swarm loneliness is a physical injury. This episode serves as a cautionary tale about the irreversibility of vocal masculinization and the neurological severance caused by cross-species androgens. The CT's journey mirrors the acute to subacute regret seen in human detransitioners who feel their voices or social connectivity permanently lost. Next, we look at Xanthian species, sequentially hermaphroditic gastropod, occupying a fluid exosuit. Age 58 GSC, late onset regret 15 years, following permanent hormonal and neurosurgical phase lock to male morph, violent autoimmune rejection of feminization attempt. Patient is Zyra. Xanthians live in graceful biological cycles. Every 12 years, in response to colony density and lunar tides, they shimmer between female, ripe, nurturing, ovi-bearing, and male, assertive, colorful, spermatophoric phases. Zyra, at 43, rejected the cyclical uncertainty. She found a surgeon willing to implant an Andropulse subcutaneous pellet, a biointegrated device emitting a continuous surge of zathione, the potent male hormone of their species, and simultaneously sutured the phase shift nucleus in the dorsal neural cord. The male phase became eternal. Her exosuit shifted to a brilliant, aggressive crimson. She took a handsome mate, Jalor, and lived as a dominant territorial male for over a decade. Then Jalor died in a colony collapse event. Zyra found herself bereft, the male assertiveness hollowing into a barren solitude. Female phase now called to her, the desire to nurture, to knit the colony social fabric, to bear translucent egg strands in communal pools. The regret was absolute. Arriving 13 years post-implant, she longed for her lost cyclicity. A longing so profound her exosuit began to weep alkaline tears, corroding its seals. Medical findings and management. The Andropulse pellet had calcified and fused with the ventral neural plexus. Extraction risked permanent paralysis and exsanguination. The neurosuture was now a glial scar bisecting the phase shift nucleus. Spontaneous cycling was neurologically impossible. Desperate to comply with the patient's wishes, our endocrinology department attempted exogenous estrogen therapy. Xanth Astra, hell followed. Her body interpreted the estrogen as a pathogen, triggering a cytokine storm within the exosuit. She suffered generalized myoclonic seizures, hemolymphoacidosis, in a 3-week coma, during which she dreamt she was eternally female but trapped in a locked, throbbing chrysalis. She woke screaming with the crimson in a chartreuse marbled color, a somatic scream. Months of gentle chemical castration to reduce zathione, combined with intensive neuroplasticity therapy using vibrational acupuncture along the scar, allowed her phase shift nucleus to partially reawaken. Zyra now exists permanently in a tertiary non-binary phase, her skin a peaceful apricot rose. She cannot cycle, but she can love again, and has become a counselor for Xanthian detransitioners. Dr. Clax notes, this is the pellet problem. Steady-state delivery avoids mood swings, but creates a sense of biological certainty that, when regretted, becomes a horror. We must always ask, can this be reversed without killing the patient? The episode is a parable about permanent implants and late-onset regret. Alright. Next, we have the descended soul, Vlek, emergent co-consciousness, Lily, vaporous non-human intelligence, luminiferous aether, inhabiting custom-grown Terran humanoid female vessel. Vessel 0.2 GSC, 2 earthly months, Vlek entity approx 2,000 years. Acute regret, 2 months, following full embodiment, severe depersonalization, dual identity war, request for disembodiment without homicide. Vlek was once a song of electromagnetism between nebulae, an NHI as ancient as star laughter. It observed human romance, the poetry of gendered flesh, and developed an aesthetic species body incongruence, a yearning for the density of skin, the drama of hormones, the aching specificity of being a quote-unquote woman. Through a consciousness transfer service at the shadow port of Kreshta, Vlek paid to grow a perfect female human body, complete with accelerated puberty and a sensitive limbic system. On the 3rd day of the vessel's life, a soul injection concentrated conscious plasma overrode the nascent brain's budding personhood, and Vlek descended. Immediately, dysphoria struck. The weight of bones, the tyranny of a menstrual cycle that arrived like a red, cramping betrayal, the way male humanoid technicians looked at the vessel's breasts. It was an assault. Within a week, Vlek realized this was not a home, but a prison. Worse, the original brain consciousness, now suppressed, began to surface not as a memory, but as a second terrified voice. Lily. Lily was a childlike personality, the true native of the body, now trapped in her own skull with an ancient alien who didn't want to stay. They screamed internally, scratched their own skin, experienced fugue states. A body inhabited by 2 self-aware consciousness, one seeking escape, one fighting for existence. Now, the Ethics Committee, after furious debate, approved a radical deep psychic transducer intervention. Using subliminal electromagnetic fields, we facilitated a dialogue. Vlek spoke, Lily wept, and together over weeks they negotiated a co-consciousness pact. The body's hormonal hell was partially smoothed with a continuous estrogen-progesterone dermal patch, eliminating menstrual cycling and the emotional earthquakes that triggered their conflict. The patient now identifies as a plural system, Vlek Lily. They timeshare. Vlek uses the vessel for intellectual discovery. Lily dances. Eats strawberries and experiences the joy of wind on skin. Regret has not vanished. Vlek still mourns the Aether, and Lily grieves her stolen solitude. But they cooperate. Dr. Clack states, the first case of NHI embodiment detransition, and we couldn't undo it without murder. Sometimes the only exit is to build a bigger house within the self. This is the soul-bound pill that cannot be unswallowed. The soul-bound pill that cannot be unswallowed. The log is a profound meditation on the irreversible intertwinement of identity change, where detransition means coexistence, not reversal. Alright, the pill of the hero. Blorb, later Blorb the man fungus. Species, Flume, asexual fungoid, silicon-carbon hybrid, distributed neural net, ages 27 GSC, 3-year daily ingestion of oral testoster pill, seeking humanoid male embodiment, resulting gill calcification, loss of budding reproduction, and identity fragmentation. So the Flume are tranquil. They colonize phosphorescent caves, communicate via puffs of spore pheromone, and reproduce joyfully by budding. Blorb, however, binge-banned Earth media, action holovids of testosterone-drenched heroes, and developed a ferocious human morphic species dysphoria. He wanted biceps, a deep voice, a libido that could conquer, a rogue biohacker engineered an oral medication, a pill taken daily that reprogrammed Flume ribosomes to synthesize a monstrously potent androgenic compound, a cross-species analog of testosterone, undecanoate, absorbed via silicon lymph. He took it faithfully. Over 18 months, pseudo-arms erupted. His fruiting body flattened into a torso-like shape, and his gill slits calcified to create a resonating cavity for a quote-unquote voice. A rasping, desperate groan. Budding ceased entirely, replaced by a constant, unrelieved, priapic tension. Regret arrived in year 2, when he realized he would never be human, only a grotesque imitation, a fungus mistaken for a tumor by a passing Terran survey crew who shot at him. The testoster pill had not given him heroism. It had isolated him from his species and his own body. Oral androgen, testoster pill, produced a high DHT equivalent metabolite ratio, accelerating permanent gill calcification and hyphae fibrosis. Immediate discontinuation was advised. Surgical removal of calcified plates allowed new gill buds to struggle forth over months. The deepest wound was identity. The pill's androgen metabolites had partially overridden his distributed neural net with a rigid, aggressive hero persona that warred with his gentle Flume consciousness. And we treated this with mycelial reintegration therapy, grafting Blorb onto a donor Flume mother colony to reabsorb communal ancestral memories and pheromonal peace. Blorb did not return to his original state. Instead, he fused, now calling himself Blorb the man fungus. He retained some pseudo-arm structures and a microdoses an estrogenic balancing compound to soften calcifications. He tells fungus hero tales around phosphorescent vents, a unique hybrid at peace. Dr. Clack's muses oral androgens, bypassing first-pass metabolism, can lead to faster and more profound DHT-driven virilization. His regret was acute in onset, but took 2 years to fully surface when the idealized image of his transformed self died. He survived that death. Now he's something entirely new, and it's beautiful. But God, the suffering it took. The episode closes with a poignant message. Detransition can mean integration rather than eradication of changes. All right. This is transgenerational scarring, ancestral male perpetuated trauma in the female nervous system, brain and heart, a lifespan neuroendocrine perspective. All right, we're talking about women's health here, because this is really what I want to study, as well as astrology. But the human body is just so fascinating and so complex. It's insane. Our abstract here is females across history have been subjected to systematic, often male-perpetrated physical and psychological trauma, ranging from intimate partner violence and sexual assault to structural oppression and institutionalized discrimination. Emerging evidence from transgenerational epigenetics reveals that such trauma can imprint upon female biology not only directly, but across generations via non-genetic inheritance. This review synthesizes interdisciplinary data from neuroimaging, autonomic physiology, epigenetics, and cardiology to delineate the lifelong impact of ancestral and familial male-perpetrated trauma on the female nervous system, brain, and heart. We trace a trajectory from prenatal epigenetic programming through childhood stress reactivity, adolescent brain maturation, adult allostatic load, and cardiovascular senescence. A conceptual model of transgenerational autonomic reverberation is proposed, wherein inherited changes in glucocorticoid receptor sensitivity, oxytocinergic function, and sympathetic vagal balance predisposes females to a signature pattern of hypervigilance, threat salience, emotional dysregulation, and early cardiovascular aging. Recognition of this legacy is essential for trauma-informed, sex-specific medical practice. There's barely any good doctors out there, to be honest with you. So, male violence against women is the most pervasive human rights violation in recorded history. Yes, I said it. Anthropological and historical records document chronic exposure of females to subjugation, domestic brutality, forced marriage, sexual coercion, and femicide across cultures and epochs. In addition to direct survivors, the children and grandchildren of these women often exhibit increased rates of anxiety, depression, somatic disorders, and cardiovascular disease, even absent direct abuse. This phenomenon, sometimes called ancestral or intergenerational trauma, is increasingly understood through the lens of epigenetic programming of the stress response, particularly the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, HPA axis, the autonomic nervous system, and brain circuits governing fear and attachment. This report examines the impact of male-perpetrated ancestral trauma, specifically on the female body, focusing on three interconnected systems: the nervous system, central and autonomic, the brain, structures and networks mediating emotion, memory, and social cognition, and the heart, cardiac, electrophysiology, ischemic vulnerability, and neurocardiac coupling. We track these effects over the female lifespan from in utero development to old age and contextualize them within a multi-generational framework. The goal is to equip clinicians and researchers with a biologically grounded, sex-specific understanding of why historical trauma against women continues to echo in the minds, brains, and hearts of their female descendants. Historical and ancestral trauma, a female-specific burden. Ancestral trauma against females typically involves direct male violence, like intimate partner abuse, rape, genital mutilation, honor killings, forced impregnation, and genocide, just to name a few. Structural oppression, like denial of property, education, political voice, forced dependence on male kin and spouses, as well as chronic captivity-like conditions, extended domestic confinement, lack of escape from abusive environments. While males also suffer historical trauma, the female-specific pattern is characterized by vulnerability that is biologically sexual in nature, targeting reproductive organs, pregnancy, and the maternal bond, and is often perpetuated with the very relationships meant to provide safety: husbands, fathers, male relatives. This creates a profound betrayal trauma dynamic, which shapes oxytocin-dependent attachment circuitry in survivor brains and may be transmitted to offspring via altered maternal care and in utero programming. And this is a form of something called learned helplessness. It's a form of abuse. All right. On to transgenerational epigenetic mechanisms. So trauma-induced epigenetic modifications can propagate across generations through multiple pathways. Like germline epigenetic marks, animal models of maternal separation and predator odor stress demonstrate that paternal or maternal traumatic experiences can alter DNA methylation and histone modifications in gametes. Offspring of stressed females show altered methylation of the hippocampal glucocorticoid receptor gene, also known as NR3C1, leading to enhanced HPA axis reactivity. And this effect has been replicated in human cohorts of Holocaust descendants and indigenous communities. Female-specific transmission often involves maternal intergenerational effects via the prenatal environment. Traumatized mothers provide a glucocorticoid-rich milieu to the developing fetus, shaping the fetal epigenome. Uterine programming. A traumatized pregnant woman exposed to ongoing male violence experiences elevated cortisol, which crosses the placenta. This in utero cortisol exposure programs the fetus's stress axis toward hyperreactivity. Female fetuses are particularly vulnerable. Estrogen potentiates glucocorticoid receptor expression in the hippocampus. In early life, cortisol overshoot can permanently downregulate these receptors, impairing negative feedback and setting a lifelong trajectory of HPA hyperdrive. Postnatal caregiving. Traumatized mothers may exhibit depressed, anxious, or dissociative caregiving, disrupting attachment. Maternal licking and grooming in rodents alters hippocampal glucocorticoid receptor density via DNA methylation. Human studies parallel this. Low maternal warmth correlates with higher childhood cortisol. Male-perpetrated domestic violence often occurs with maternal depression, generating a double hit for the child. Direct exposure to paternal threat plus altered maternal buffering. The female child, identifying with the victimized mother, may internalize a defensive, autonomic posture characterized by high sympathetic tone, blunted vagal brake, and exaggerated threat detection. The female brain, lifelong neuroanatomical and functional signatures. Prenatal and early childhood. Ancestral trauma predisposes the developing female brain to accelerated amygdala maturation. High prenatal cortisol, combined with placental signals from a mother under threat, sensitizes the amygdala to androgens and glucocorticoids, increasing dendritic arborization in the basolateral nucleus. At birth, female infants of traumatized mothers show elevated heart rate and startle responses to male voices, an innate threat bias. By age 3 through 5, structural MRI research finds smaller hippocampal volumes in girls exposed to interparental violence, even without direct abuse to the girl. This early reduction in hippocampal volume, a region crucial for context-dependent fear inhibition, may predispose to later overgeneralization of fear to safe contexts, a hallmark of PTSD seen disproportionately in women. All right, moving right along to adolescence. Adolescent female brains undergo synaptic pruning and estrogen-driven remodeling of limbic circuits. In the context of ancestral trauma, this can produce a vicious cycle. Rising ovarian hormones amplify HPA axis reactivity, leading to heightened emotional volatility and vulnerability to further interpersonal victimization, re-victimization. fMRI studies show that girls with family histories of domestic violence exhibit hyperactivation of the anterior insula and dorsal anterior cingulate cortex during social rejection tasks, suggesting a sensitized social pain network. The prefrontal cortex, which normally downregulates amygdala responses, shows reduced functional connectivity with the amygdala in these girls, impairing cognitive regulation of fear. This may underlie the disproportionately high rates of self-harm, eating disorders, and borderline personality features in female children of violent homes, all conditions rooted in dysregulated threat and attachment circuitry. And just severe isolation from your own family. I've been a scapegoat with my family since I was born. They just needed to have one more kid to shit on. Adulthood. In adulthood, the accumulated allostatic load becomes evident. Women with ancestral trauma history show amygdala hyperactivity to ambiguous threat cues, especially male faces with neutral or angry expressions. Hippocampal volume loss, greater than expected for age, correlated with cumulative adverse events across lineage. Medial prefrontal cortex hypofunction during emotion regulation tasks, indicating an override failure when attempting to suppress fear. Disrupted default mode network connectivity associated with rumination, dissociative symptoms, and a fragmented sense of self. Wow, I wonder how I ended up a transitioner, reflecting the intergenerational fragmentation of identity imposed by subjugation. Thanks, Dad. Thanks, Mom. Really appreciated it, and still do, because I have to live with it for the rest of my fucking life. Neuroendocrinologically, adult female survivors and descendants frequently exhibit lower basal cortisol with increased phasic reactivity, a paradoxical pattern of glucocorticoid resistance and high central CRH tone. This dysregulation fuels a chronic low-grade inflammatory state, as CRH drives mast cell degranulation and microglial priming. linking emotional trauma to unexplained somatic syndromes, fibromyalgia, chronic pelvic pain, migraine, which disproportionately affect women. Aging and dementia risk. Lifelong HPA axis hyperdrive and hippocampal atrophy accelerate cognitive aging. Women with high lifetime trauma exposure, including intergenerational, are at increased risk for Alzheimer's disease, likely due to synergistic effects of elevated cortisol, inflammation, and reduced neurotrophic support, BDNF. APOE4 carriers with ancestral trauma show particularly pronounced hippocampal shrinkage. Moreover, loss of estrogen at menopause removes a protective factor against oxidative stress, unveiling an accelerated neurodegenerative trajectory in trauma-burdened women. And especially imagine what happens when you've been on testosterone for an amount of time. What happens when you really do have to go through menopause as a female? They don't want us to know. The autonomic nervous system and heart, transgenerational cardiac costs. The heart is an end organ of emotional life, and ancestral trauma etches itself deeply into cardiac physiology. Autonomic imprint. Female descendants of trauma-exposed lineages often display a chronic autonomic profile of sympathetic predominance and parasympathetic withdrawal, elevated resting heart rate, reduced heart rate variability, HRV, especially high-frequency power linked to vagal tone, exaggerated cardiovascular reactivity to stressors, and delayed recovery after stress. Now, this pattern is inducible transgenerationally. Rodent studies show that offspring of females subjected to chronic, unpredictable stress during pregnancy have reduced cardiac vagal tone at baseline and exaggerated pressor responses. In humans, daughters of women who experience severe male violence exhibit lower 24-hour HRV and higher nocturnal heart rate, even when controlling for their own trauma history. Alright, cardiac ischemic vulnerability. Chronic sympathetic overdrive promotes systemic hypertension, endothelial dysfunction, and platelet activation. The combination of HPA axis disruption and autonomic imbalance leads to metabolic syndrome components, insulin resistance, visceral adiposity earlier in adulthood. Women with high childhood and ancestral adversity have a 2 through 3-fold increased risk of early onset coronary artery disease. Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, stress-induced apical ballooning, a condition almost exclusive to postmenopausal women with emotional trauma histories and arrhythmias such as atrial fibrillation. Sorry for this purple line. Now I want to go over neurocardiac coupling and heart memory. The concept of a heart-brain axis transgenerational memory. So, the concept of a heart-brain axis transgenerational memory emerges. Cardiac phenotypes such as blunted cardiac reactivity, freeze response, or a hypercontractility during recall trauma can be observed in female descendants. Neuroimaging during cardiac interoceptive tasks reveals altered insula and anterior cingulate processing of heartbeat evoked potentials, suggesting that the brain's representation of cardiac state is skewed toward threat detection even at rest. Lifespan trajectory. Childhood, high resting heart rate, frequent somatic complaints, non-cardiac chest pain, palpitations. Reproductive years, pregnancy can unmask latent autonomic imbalance as gestational preeclampsia or peripartum cardiomyopathy. Perimenopause. Loss of estrogen's vasodilatory and vagoprotective effects leads to rapid blood pressure rises and HRV decline. Trauma history predicts earlier menopause owing to accelerated ovarian follicular depletion, which compounds cardiovascular risk. And we always hear men have the heart problems. Men have the heart problems. My God. It's almost like we live in a patriarchal westernized society. Old age. Diastolic dysfunction with preserved ejection fraction. Heart failure with preserved EF is more prevalent in women with trauma histories as chronic inflammation and microvascular ischemia stiffen the left ventricle. The heart, scarred by ancestral trauma, ages faster. Clinical manifestations across the female lifespan. A female descendant of male-perpetrated ancestral trauma may present with a clustering of psychiatric, complex PTSD, depression, dissociative disorders, borderline personality traits, generalized anxiety, phobias of male strangers, or intimate relationships. Neurologic, chronic headache, fibromyalgia, functional neurological disorders, conversion, non-epileptic seizures. Yes, this is serious. Cardiometabolic, early hypertension, labile heart rate, palpitations, atypical chest pain, metabolic syndrome, as well as reproductive, menstrual abnormalities, infertility, adverse pregnancy outcomes, preterm birth, low birth weight, preeclampsia, which in turn propagate trauma to the next generation, as well as immunologic, elevated inflammatory markers, increased autoimmune disease, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, conditions with a strong female predominance that are linked to childhood maltreatment. A key clinical insight, these conditions are often treatment resistant when approached purely pharmacologically because they are rooted in deeply engraved neurobiological and intergenerational pathways that require a biopsychosocial and intergenerational healing framework. So toward healing, re-regulation of the female nervous system. Intervention must be multi-layered, trauma-informed, and generational. Of course. We see psychotherapy, like phase-based trauma therapy, somatic experiencing, EMDR, DBT, that targets autonomic dysregulation and attachment trauma, including mother-daughter dyads can interrupt transmission. Vagal neuromodulation, HRV biofeedback, slow-paced breathing, vagal nerve stimulation, transcutaneous to restore cardiac autonomic tone. Oxytocin boosting, safe social support networks, empathy-based therapies, and possible intranasal oxytocin. Experimental to recalibrate threat and trust circuits. Cardiovascular risk management, aggressive screening for hypertension, dyslipidemia, and inflammation starting in the third decade. Consider beta blockers or ACE inhibitors for sympathetic overactivity if non-pharmacological means insufficient. Epigenetic plasticity, interventions, diet, exercise, stress reduction, environmental enrichment that upregulate B, D, and F. Increase hippocampal neurogenesis and potentially reverse some methylation silence genes. Community healing, restorative justice, collective ritual, and reclamation of female cultural identity can heal the ancestral legacy. Conclude that the historical pattern of male-perpetrated violence against women has encoded a biological legacy in the female nervous system, brain, and heart that unfolds across a lifetime. This intergenerational transmission operates through epigenetic pathways, HPA axes, and autonomic programming, and cardiac neurocoupling, producing a distinct female phenotype of threat sensitivity, emotional dysregulation, cardiovascular vulnerability, and accelerated somatic aging. Recognizing this deep-seated legacy compels a paradigm shift from blaming the individual woman for her complex presentations to understanding her body as a living record of ancestral survival. Such a perspective not only depathologizes her symptoms, but opens avenues for biologically grounded, generationally sensitive therapies that can finally quiet the echoes of historical adversity. These are keywords if you want to check these out. Intergenerational trauma, female, nervous system, heart, epigenetics, HPA axis, autonomic, cardiovascular, lifespan, male violence, ancestral. And here's our conceptual textbook excerpt. Ancestral male violence in the female body, lifelong neurocardiac consequences from women's psychoneuroendocrinology, sex, gender, and intergenerational health. Second edition. So the learning objectives here: define ancestral trauma in the context of historical male-perpetrated violence against females. Explain the epigenetic mechanisms of transgenerational stress transmission to the female nervous system. Describe the effects of ancestral trauma on female brain structure and function across development. Correlate autonomic imbalance and cardiac outcomes with intergenerational trauma. Outline Outline a lifespan approach to recognizing and treating trauma-encoded somatic disorders in women. Alright, so the female body is not a blank slate at birth. It arrives carrying the biological echoes of its maternal lineage, echoes that may include the physiological imprints of violence, subjugation, and fear experienced by grandmothers and great-grandmothers at the hands of men. This chapter explores the scientific evidence for the transmission of ancestral male-perpetrated trauma to female descendants, focusing on the nervous system, brain, and heart. We trace the impact from fetal programming through old age, providing clinicians with a framework for understanding and treating the complex multi-system disorders that arise from this hidden heritage. Alright, historical and biological foundations. Across millennia, females have been disproportionately subjected to sexual violence, intimate partner abuse, and enforced social powerlessness. This sustained species-wide chronic stressor has created a unique evolutionary pressure on the female stress response system. The biological embedding of such trauma occurs through epigenetic marks on genes regulating cortisol, oxytocin, and serotonin, prenatal programming of fetal HPA axes and autonomic set points, altered maternal behavior that transmits behavioral and physiological patterns to daughters. The result is a transgenerational stress phenotype that sensitizes the female brain and heart to threat, even in the absence of direct personal victimization. Epigenetics of female intergenerational trauma. Animal models have elucidated key pathways. Pregnant female rodents exposed to male intruder stress, an ecologically valid model of inter-male violence exposure, produce female pups with increased methylation of the exon 1-7 promoter of the hippocampo-glucocorticoid receptor gene, reducing receptor density, elevated corticotropin-releasing hormone expression in the amygdala, reduced oxytocin receptor binding in the medial amygdala, impairing social buffering. Human studies of women whose mothers survived war-raped, intimate partner abuse, or cultural bereavement, for example, indigenous residential school survivors, reveal concordant findings. Hypermethylation of NR3C1 in peripheral blood, elevated diurnal cortisol slopes, and blunted oxytocin responses to maternal bonding. These changes are detectable in girl children before puberty, suggesting that the legacy is in place from birth. Nervous system sensitization. The female nervous system inheriting trauma is tuned for persistent threat detection. Peripheral sensory, lowered pain thresholds, hyperalgesia, increased somatic vigilance, spinal cord facilitated nociceptive reflex arcs, contributing to chronic pelvic pain and fibromyalgia. Brainstem, higher baseline norepinephrine output from locus coeruleus, maintaining the sympathetic tone. Limbic system, exaggerated amygdala responses to low-intensity threat cues, particularly male-specific cues, impaired hippocampal prefrontal top-down control. Over the female lifespan, this neurological sensitization manifests directly. In childhood, it may present as separation anxiety, selective mutism with male teachers, or somatic complaints. In adulthood, it drives hypervigilance to male partners, chronic hyperarousal symptoms of PTSD, and dissociative shutdown when the system is overwhelmed, freeze response. As estrogen wanes, the neurocircuits lose a key modulator, often triggering a severe exacerbation of anxiety and somatic symptoms at perimenopause. Cardiac and autonomic injuries. All right. The heart is a direct target of the chronic autonomic dysregulation passed down ancestrally. Physiological pathway. Maternal stress during pregnancy elevates fetal cortisol exposure, which programs the fetal sinoatrial node and cardiac autonomic ganglia toward increased sympathetic drive. Postnatally, deficient maternal-infant bonding reduces vagal tone development. The vagal brake is poorly established. Childhood in a violent home epigenetically upregulates pro-inflammatory cytokines and downregulates endothelial nitric oxide synthase, priming the vasculature for atherosclerosis. In adulthood, daily experiences of sexism and threat reactivate the same autonomic cascade, causing sustained hypertension, tachycardia, and reduced baroreflex sensitivity. By menopause, the unprotected heart undergoes accelerated aging, diastolic dysfunction, left ventricular hypertrophy, and arrhythmogenic potential. Clinical footprints include Takotsubo cardiomyopathy precipitated by emotional conflict, especially with a male partner, like an argument, infidelity, neurocardiogenic syncope in young women with abuse histories, labile hypertension poorly responsive to medication requiring stress reduction and autonomic retraining. And then we have our table here, which shows cardiac signs of ancestral trauma across female lifespan. We have our life stage, and then we have our cardiac phenotype. Fetal, altered heart rate variability patterns, reactive beats to male voices. Childhood, resting sinus tachycardia, functional chest pain. Adolescence, orthostatic intolerance, neurocardiogenic syncope. Adulthood, essential hypertension, microvascular angina, reduced HRV, Takotsubo. Menopause, accelerated diastolic dysfunction, higher AF risk. Old age, heart failure with preserved EF, aortic stiffening. Clinical integration and trauma-informed care. When a female patient presents with multi-system problems, chronic pain, anxiety, hypertension, and a history that doesn't add up, the possibility of ancestral trauma must be considered. A trauma-informed, ancestrally aware approach involves the following. Expanding the history. Ask about family stories of violence, migration, genocide, sexual abuse. Have the women in your family experience trauma normalizes the inquiry. Listening for cardiac trauma, palpitations, and chest pain may be cardiac memories of fear, not merely anxiety. Neuroautonomic assessment, 24-hour HRV monitoring, orthostatic vitals, and salivary cortisol profile can reveal hidden dysregulation. Therapeutic alliance recognize that the female patient may have a learned fear of male clinicians or authority figures, provide choice and control in examinations. Intergenerational healing, encourage mother-daughter communication to break the silence, perhaps with family therapy, reparative mothering interventions can buffer the next generation. Treatment strategies, lifestyle and mind-body, HRV biofeedback and slow breathing to retrain vagal tone, target increase HV power by 20%, trauma-sensitive yoga or Qigong to reconnect body and restore interoceptive accuracy. Regular moderate intensity aerobic exercise to upregulate BDNF and improve endothelial function. Pharmacological selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors like SSRIs for PTSD and depression, but watch for QT prolongation. And then, yeah, you can keep on looking at these, but I believe some of these work more than others. We're not being, told about these. We're not really talking about these treatments and even these types of illnesses. All right. So, we'll finish up here. Future directions. Research must move from correlation to causation. We need longitudinal studies of 3-generation cohorts from grandmother, mother, and daughter with epigenetic, neuroimaging, and cardiac outcomes. The development of epigenetic editing. CRISPR may one day allow reversal of harmful methylation marks. Moreover, societal efforts to end male violence against women are themselves the ultimate preventive medicine, halting the biological transmission of trauma at its source. The female nervous system, brain, and heart hold a biological record of ancestral male violence. This chapter has illuminated how that record is written in epigenetic code, autonomic tone, brain circuit sensitivity, and cardiac structure. By validating and addressing this deep heritage, clinicians can move beyond symptom suppression to genuine healing, restoring not only the individual woman, but potentially the health of her lineage. In chapter summary here, ancestral male perpetrated trauma imprints the female HPA axes, autonomic balance, and brain threat networks via epigenetic and prenatal programming. These changes manifest throughout life as heightened stress reactivity, mental illness, chronic pain, and cardiovascular disease. A trauma-informed intergenerational approach can identify and treat these conditions, offering hope for breaking the cycle. Next, I will make this its own video since this is files of the Northwest Institute of Occult Medicine, declassified, of course, based off Gravity Falls Township, Roadkill County, Oregon. So essentially the following documents were discovered moldering beneath the floorboards of the abandoned Northwest Manor, wrapped in a deerskin and bound with piano wire. Cover bears a hand-drawn symbol of Caduceus superimposed over a 6-fingered astrolabe. Dipper Pines, in his post-Weird-Mageddon archaeological survey of the manor, found the folio and immediately recognized the handwriting as that of Stanford Philbrick Pines, but for none of the journals had ever revealed. These were not monster hunting logs, they were medical charts. Scrawled on the first page is a single line in quill ink. Gravity Falls is a wound in the firmament, where the veil thins, the stars leak into the blood. To heal the impossible, one must learn the language of planets. I call it astrocryptic medicine. This is my most dangerous science. The folio contains advanced medical astrology field reports, case studies of cryptids treated using the hermetic principles of decumbiture, planetary phytotherapy, and iatromathematics. They are reproduced below, unedited, with annotations from the Contemporary Falls Astromedical Research Station, also known as FAMRS. And we have a few case files to go over. So I think we'll go over the first one just so you guys can actually, walk through it with me. Alright. So this first case file is the Gremlobin juvenile. Patient ID, we see it's Grendel. Gram 12b, we have the species, which is Horridus Cyticus horridus. And the date of intake is the third waxing crescent in Gemini, year of the strange moon, July 14th, 1982. The presenting complaint is spontaneous petrification of left arm, intermittent reality warping panic attacks, pathological pessimism spirals manifesting as localized acid rain over the patient's head. We have a decumbiture chart here. Time of consultation is 10:42 p.m. Pacific Sidereal Time. Ford's notes begin with an astrological chart cast for the moment the patient sat on the examination table, a repurposed sacrificial altar grudgingly lent by the Manitars. So we see the ascendant, the sun, the moon, Mars, and Mercury, and these are the most important placements in my opinion. Pisces ascendant, 6 degrees 42, conjunct fixed star sheet, extreme misfortune, drowning, genius. Sun, Cancer, 22 degrees, 15th house of ancestral curses, an extension Ford invented. Moon, Scorpio, 14 degrees in the 8th, conjunct Algol, exact, the demon's head. Mars, retrograde in Virgo in the 6th, illness house, squared by Saturn and Sag from the 3rd, nervous system. Mercury, combusting Cancer, tri-Neptune in Scorpio, but opposed by retrograde Jupiter in Capricorn. Pessimism, hypertrophy. Ford's assessment, the chart screams Algol conjunct the moon, indicates cyclical transformation terrors, a monstrous Gorgon's holdover. Mars retrograde shows a frustrated malefic energy, a fire-dominant creature forced into an earth body that cannot burn freely. The arm's petrification is a Saturnian pathology, a failed attempt to armor the self against a perceived threat. The patient saw his own reflection in a puddle of ghost tears, and fell into a loop of existential dread so profound his left ulna turned to granite. We have humoral astrological diagnosis. In medical astrology, each sign governs a body part. The Graham-Lobens natal chart, discovered through echolalia regression, which is a technique whereby the patient's own fears scream out the time of birth, reveals Gemini natal ascendant. Graham-Lobens are mutable, trickster parrots, but Gemini governs the arms and lungs. An affliction to Gemini creates dual arm pathologies or discord between the two sides of the self. Natal moon in Capricorn, the 12th, deeply suppressed vulnerability. Creature's primary defense is existential terror projection, but the moon in Saturn ruled Capricorn indicates a desperate loneliness hidden beneath the horror. Transiting Saturn squaring natal moon, the current petrification episode is triggered by Saturn's current transit. The left arm, ruled by moon in medical astrology, hardened as a somatic defense. So Ford's diagnosis, Saturnine melancholia crystallized in the matter. The patient's emotional state has become physically literal, a psychosomatic lithification. This is not mere petrification. It is a philosopher's stone of despair. You have a treatment protocol, astrological therapeutics. Ford designed a 3-phase intervention based on planetary hours and talismanic phytotherapy. So phase 1 is Mars propitiation, and this is immediate. Then we have phase 2, which is lunar purification, which is ongoing. And then we have phase 3, which is antidoto crystal elixir. So first phase, on a Tuesday, Mars Day, during the planetary hour of Mars, apply a poultice of dragon's blood resin, ginger, and crushed nettle to the petrified arm wrapped in red silk. The purpose is Mars governs muscle and movement, breaks Saturn's rigid structures. Ford chanted the Orphic to Aries, which he claims makes Graham-Lobens weep with catharsis. Phase 2 is a moon talisman, silver disc engraved with a crab and the Arabic letter for Yah, hung around the Graham-Lobens neck, charged under a Cancer moon. Patient must avoid reflective surfaces for 1 lunar cycle. Ford arranged for the Graham-Loben to live in a fun dungeon of the tent of telepathy with all mirrors covered. The only entertainment, a loop of upbeat polka music. Polka starves existential dread, Ford writes. It is the anti-Saturn. Phase 3 is gem essence of lapis lazuli, Jupiter, to counteract Saturnine pessimism, combined with rose quartz, Venus to instill self-love. Administered daily at sunrise, Jupiter hour, into the Graham-Lobens eye, the right eye, which projects the reality warping fear. We have the outcome and follow-up. Within 3 weeks, the petrified arm cracked like a chrysalis, revealing new fleshy but still slightly sparkly skin. The Graham-Loben developed a disconcerting giggle and began speaking in uplifting platitudes, which terrified the gnomes more than its previous pessimism. Ford notes total success, patient now weaponizes optimism, side effect, occasional sparkle sneezes, prognosis excellent, though Jupiter may cause weight gain from excessive joy. Now I will see you in the next video going over the next case files, and that will start off with the multi-bear, eldest matriarch. Species is Ursus multiplex polymorphic ursine consciousness. Patient ID is URS Mal the numberless. Date of intake is the 12th waning gibbous in Aquarius, undefined year, time loop. We see the presenting complaint is uncontrolled head multiplication. The patient has manifested 8 screaming bear heads, each with a distinct personality disorder and a 9th forming at the base of the tail. I hope to see you there with peace and love. Piscean out.